Today we're going to talk about the firmament. Now, I sort of said that I wasn't going to do a Flat Earth Part 2. And so, and because that's really just sort of the context of the science behind what people are now questioning without really a context. Now, I will admit that I don't have any major background in the religious pursuits of a firmament, right? You read it in the Bible talking about how they have, an ocean above the firmament, and we have water down here, and we're somehow some bubble of life inside there. So I'm just going to approach this from a couple angles here. We are going to go over some stuff that's mind-blowing, stuff that I've mentioned before a little bit, and, little teardrops of stuff, and some of the stuff we talked about in the first episode that may not be the best piece of evidence, that the world might be a different shape. But let's just come at it from the firmament, because that's what this episode's going to be called. I did this once before. I don't think I did a very good job. I sort of got emotional about Neil deGrasse Tyson being such a liar. Got to be careful. But the assertion is, for those of you who are brand new to this, the end of about August last year, 2015, this whole flat earth thing resurfaced out of nothing, right? Everyone's perfectly fine with heliocentric ball theory, and then all of a sudden, kaboom, it's 1490 whatever, and we're back to a flat earth idea. And the funny thing about it is that you immediately just go, what is going on with the world, that there is such a large population of utterly stupid, gullible people that they would believe the world is flat. That's the first feeling you have, unless you're just the most enlightened, open-minded person ever. And then you start doing some research, and you start having your mind blown to little pieces. Now, I come with an extremely scientific background, okay, folks? Now, I don't have any degree in round ball earth, because no one even tries to teach it beyond saying, hey, look at the globe, kids. Look at these fake pictures of Earth from space. And so there's just no question. It's a ball. That's it. The planets are round. Our moon is round. The sun is round. Right? Stars, we can never get a close look at a star. Moons around the planets are round, So what the hell's going on here? Now let's just pull back to the theory of a firmament, which is that regardless of other things around, the flat earth people, and a lot of biblical writings in many religions talk about, they do talk about the four corners of the earth, which indicates a square, but regardless of whether or not they believe it to be a square or a disc, they always portray the part that we live in as the round disc area in the middle of either a square table or the disc itself. If you want to roll your eyes, hang in there, because this is going to get mind-blowing here. I'm going to hit you pretty quick with a few what I would call Occam's razors when it comes to you believing that it's a round ball. And Neil deGrasse Tyson completely refuted everything you believe as well, even though he's trying to prove what you believe. It's really odd. The whole thing is really bizarre, how it seems to be like unraveling either the simulation that we're in or this place that we're in. It's all getting out of control by mere cross-referencing information between humans, which I think is just awesome and powerful. But we seem to have a problem believing that any life force in the universe would ever create a container, sort of like a snow globe. That's really what it looks like, right? There's a land at the bottom of a snow globe, and then there's this atmosphere across the top with this dome over it. Now, we build snow globes. We have built snow globes for at least 100 years. I don't know when they were invented. I'm sure it goes back even further than that, maybe a couple thousand years, as soon as glass could be created, right? We can't build a firmament dome the size of what we perceive to be reality, right? Our world. Say we're not on some ball. We can't build them that big. And so we immediately, with our ego and our lack of perception to think outside of what we're capable of doing, we do not believe that others could do it. Whether it be they look exactly like us, wearing big, black trench coats with little tiny heads and wearing these old hats, right? To great aliens, to reptiles, to whatever. We can't imagine it, so no one else can do it. Now, those of you who believe in aliens, okay, I'm going to lean on you to give this a little more credibility. If you sit around and you say, well, the existence of aliens is not a debatable question. The existence of aliens is an absolute fact. Simply because of the age of the universe, somebody gained sentient life before we did, and they advanced for millions of years, if not billions of years, being sentient, being peaceful, and of course, all tech and all math and all construction, architecture, science, biology would be within their pool of information, and they could essentially own the universe. Now, if it is a ball Earth, and we're all just a bunch of specks on these heliocentric globes called life, then I would say that it doesn't take a whole hell of a lot to master the universe. I really don't think it takes that much. How many more thousands of years would it take human beings alone to master gravity, energy? Tesla really had us there. Tesla had us at a full point of utterly mastering, electricity, gravity, everything. And that guy lived, and we've been able to make a few thousand more of that dude, or a few million more of those kind of guys and girls. We'd be able to go anywhere in the universe that we like. Period. We could drive through suns. We could build planets like the legendary planet of Nagrathea. We could. We absolutely could. Look at the curve of unbelievable discovery that man has been able to do, and I hardly think we're the smartest people on the planet, right? Or people in the universe, right? So building a firmament dome and putting inside that dome, like a petri dish with a little cover over the top, a sampling of our own DNA, our own species, or perhaps some other creature that we find in the universe, or something that we magically engineer. Once you look at the design of a hummingbird, the design of a red robin, the design of a lion, of a panther, it is hard, and a flower, right? It is hard not to acknowledge intelligent design, that someone, the same kind of mind that would do an Italian Lamborghini is the same kind of mind that does bird design. It just looks so absolutely intelligent. Go look up the dragon mantis. The dragon praying mantis. It's a red praying mantis. It might be the most unbelievably gorgeous insect I've ever seen in my life. It is literally like the Team Lamborghini said, oh, we got a little side gig with God to make a praying mantis. Check this shit out. And this dude's just like black and red and just got the coolest freaking skull on his little things. Unbelievable. Massively intelligent little guy anyway. So the idea that we live in a firmament is, one, completely and utterly plausible for a couple reasons, and it should be plausible to you for the same reasons. And the reasons are that you haven't been to the South Pole. You have not flown over the South Pole. If you can hear my voice, you have not traveled in a plane over the continent that we call Antarctica. You haven't. You, if you hear my voice, have never been so far away from Earth that you could see it in a globe fashion. You haven't. And those are the two pieces of proof that you need to prove that you are where they say you are. But you don't have that proof. But you believe organizations that tell you they've shown you the proof when they've been caught red-handed lying about everything. Now, obviously, when you start thinking about a firmament, you start thinking, dude, what are you, an idiot? Like, seriously, are you so stupid that you would believe this stuff? All right, let's do a few fact checks about this planet of ours. The continent of Antarctica is approximately 12,000 miles around. Now, it's a very jagged structure as portrayed on a map. It's very jagged as portrayed on a globe. But the average distance around, if you just make it a nice circle, is 12,000 miles around. However, James Cook, Captain Cook, the one sailor to take his team around the Antarctica, full circumference journey around Antarctica, as reported in Wikipedia, traveled approximately 60,000 miles around this little continent down there. Now, that's for those of you who are bad with math, that's nearly 5 times exactly the distance that I just told you. 5 times 12 is 60. All right. So let's say you got a little bit lost around this 12,000 mile thing. You don't end up doing 60,000 miles. And the guy that was closest to his journey who pulled out after, I think, 4 years, and he had gone 40,000 miles. And they simply ran out of food and resources and money to continue the journey. And so they pulled out. Do you know that if we take the flat earth model, that's essentially the UN logo, right? And you take the continent idea and you spread it out as a firmament barrier, right? Think about a container that is floating in a really cold space on the outside. And we have oceans that go straight up to the edge of this container, which, I don't know, maybe it's glass. I don't know. It's transparent something or other. Maybe it's something else. But the water goes up against an edge that is at 0 Kelvin. 360 degrees below zero. You're going to get 300 miles at least of ice before the water starts to warm up due to this thing called the sun. And that's exactly what we see. It's 300 miles to the center of Antarctica is what they say. Except it's 60,000 miles around, which doesn't match the continent at all. It matches the flat earth disk model. And that's Wikipedia, people. So you've got to explain to me why Captain James Cook, even with errors, went 5 times the distance, and his nearest competitor went 40,000 miles, both of which are unbelievably larger than the continent down there. So that's your first piece of evidence you have to get around. Forget everything else you've been told about flat earth, or if you've never heard it, anything you've been told about round earth. It's a little bit of an eye-opener. Second piece of really intense evidence is what we call precession with gyroscopes in planes. Sounds complicated, but it's not. If any of you have ever played with a gyroscope in your lifetime as a child, you hold it up and that steel little, wire that touches the bottom goes to the top. And the gyroscope has a little equator. And usually you have a string you put on it, right? Remember these things? And you'd yank on the string and the gyroscope would start spinning. And you could move that thing wherever you wanted to. And the gyroscope always stayed exactly perpendicular to the angle that you started it at. So if you start it sideways, it just stays that way. If you start it straight up and down, it stays that way. And you can move that thing around the outside however you want, and it stays in place. Well, every single plane, every single jet has a gyroscope in it, which helps it figure out how to stay level, right? The thing is perpendicular at the startup of every single plane trip. As the plane travels north to south, it is the outer wire around the gyroscope. And what should happen is, as you travel around a curved ball, and the main trip is from London, England to Cairo, Egypt. You are traveling literally almost half the distance of the curvature of the Earth. If you start the gyroscope straight up and down in London and you fly to Cairo, when you look back at that gyroscope in your dashboard, it should be nearly horizontal because it's still aligned to the ground in London. Problem. Pilots around the world have now admitted precession never happens, and it has never happened in their lifetime. That suggests that there is no curvature to the Earth whatsoever. You got to explain these things if you want to live on a ball Earth, if you want to chastise anyone for talking about flat Earth. Neil deGrasse Tyson was confronted about flat Earth, and either he is horribly, horribly ignorant human being who has merely had scripted words written for him, or he is just really bad at being a scientist. Because a scientist should be able to take the memorized and repeated knowledge that they have and create experiments. And creating experiments is really where the tire meets the pavement when it comes to proving that you are as smart as you think you are. Because you can know a lot of things, but until you figure out an experiment to prove something, it's a different world. But he went on his little show and chastised those who questioned his, obviously, heliocentric globe thing. He creates probably one of the most silly, non-proof episodes you could ever broadcast on television, doing things like taking microphones and dropping them and saying, see that, that's a gravity, and gravity proves we're on a ball. When they can't describe what gravity is, right? You look up gravity on Wikipedia and it uses the word phenomenon. A natural phenomenon is what it says in every text on planet Earth. Except for Faraday and Tesla, who says it's an ethereal wind, right? But the later he gets on a radio show, which films him as he sits down at a mic just like this with the headset on. And he says, this is your third thing you have to prove. Okay. You're a big Neil deGrasse Tyson guy who shows up in Zoolander 2 as this, this faux authority. He's the pop science czar, as I say, right? He is the expert in bullshit science with a capital S. He says that Earth isn't a ball, that Earth is an oblate sphere, and that it sags at the bottom like a pear. Like a weeble wobble, basically, right? Which is, ironically, the shape of his body. Now, let's just think about that. He says this on a syndicated radio show. It is broadcast, it is recorded, it is put on the internet. Think about it. You have had globes in every classroom based on theory that's nearly 500 years old. You have had pictures of Earth supposedly given to you by all the space organizations on planet Earth. NASA only really claiming to have two. One from the Apollo 17 mission and one from recent satellite taken in 2009. But Japan, France, England, Russia, they've all claimed to have pictures of the Earth from space. Now, they portray the Earth as a perfectly round ball. And if you want to take gravity as one atomic particle attracting towards another, then the utter uniformity of any sphere in space should be damn near as perfect as it possibly can be. Because at all times you have a central, force pulling in, a centripetal force pulling in. But then he says that Earth is sagging at the bottom. Wow. Okay, science people. Can anyone point me to up in the universe? And can anyone point me to down in the universe? Because according to pop star Neil deGrasse Tyson, the universe suddenly has a top and a bottom. And our Earth is pear-shaped, like Hillary Clinton wearing a Mao outfit. Really? Really? So you see very quickly why those of us who are brought up with ball Earth all of a sudden go, holy hell, this doesn't make any sense. Now, Neil deGrasse Tyson could just be full of it. That has nothing to do with it being round or flat, okay? These sailors going around Antarctica 60,000 miles, that starts to suggest some serious questions. Precession is absolutely technically impossible to not occur on a ball Earth. All right. Now take a Great Lake in America. The Great Lakes are pretty damn big. They almost stretch a full longitude to longitude bar. Not quite. But if the Earth was a round ball, then at the bottom of the lake, it's going a lot faster than the top of the lake, because of the way that the equator is supposedly spinning at 1,000 miles an hour. Now, the bottom of the lake should be going a lot faster horizontally, left to right, east to west, than the top, because it's closer to the equator, which is going 1,000 miles an hour, roughly. And I want to bring to your attention a really strange thing. We know on Earth that there's a lot of people that worship Satan at the very top. Now, I'm not one that believes that is something that needs to be worried about. I believe that there's always a counterforce to any force that you're experiencing, so one could say positive versus negative. Okay, but there is something about the 666 thing that people worship at the top levels. Again, churches of Satan are popping up all over the world. Giant Satan sculptures are popping up all over the world. It's really strange. Denver Airport has really hideous gargoyles all over the place, among other things. But they say that the world is tilted at a 23.4 degree tilt. Now, out of a 90 degree scale, you take 23.4, and what you have left is 6.66 or 60.6 degrees. So 66.6 degrees left. So it's 666. They then tell you that the Earth travels around the sun at 6,000 or 66,600 miles per hour. This is really hard to say. And then they tell you that the sun travels through the galaxy at 666,000 miles per hour. And they always round it up, so you don't really notice, right? They'll say 67,000 miles an hour, 670,000 miles an hour. But what they've really written down in the journals of science is a bunch of 666s. Now, isn't it interesting that this whole thing's being called into question? And when we start looking at the science, it almost looks hocus pocus, like it's like a bad telephone number on a TV show or in a movie, right? 555, boom, 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 boom. It's like saying 555, 555. You know, that would be a bad writer trying to hide the fact that this is a fictional phone number, unless that's part of the comedy of the show. But it's not the case, right? We have a bunch of 666s everywhere. Now, maybe it's just an interesting constant of the universe that someone's picked up on, and so they've reused it all over the place, and it's not as evil and dark as everyone says or thinks it is. I don't know. I'm not going to go down that path too much. But why would someone create a firmament in the first place? Because I think it's amazing that people say, oh yeah, we definitely have aliens in the universe, but no way could we possibly be in a petri dish somewhere, floating in the universe. Why not? Wouldn't human beings do such a thing? And I should note that there's a theory that we are in a round container. We're in a perfectly ball container, but we're just the plate hovering in the center, which is sort of the snow globe. Whatever. We know that we don't have any pictures of Earth from space that are accurate. We don't have a single one. Why is that? We supposedly have geocentric orbit satellites, which are far enough away from Earth to get the whole thing in one little shot. We should have hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, if not a live feed from space of Earth from satellites. Why not? Little tiny camera, broadcast down. There's infinite electricity out there. There's electron clouds supposedly going around the Earth. Well, there's your power source right there. You actually have to, if the Van Allen belts are what they say they are, your engineering challenge is only to make sure that you don't fry the circuits by usurping too much of the electron cloud power. Like you have too much power around your satellite, too much thermal heat around your satellite, and you have to build one to make sure it doesn't just vaporize due to the thermosphere, which has like an average temperature of some ungodly amount of like 2,800 degrees Celsius. And just remember, the third law of thermodynamics is that heat attracts to cold. And so you launch a satellite up into the thermosphere, all these little particles that are agitated at unprecedented temperatures. You know, I don't even know what it is Fahrenheit-wise, but like summer in Europe is, 40 degrees Celsius. Right. Here it's 100, but it's 40 in Europe. So 2,800 degrees Celsius is massive. So all those little excited particles should attract to a satellite until it just vaporizes. But supposedly it doesn't happen, right? But these things should be able to take a picture of Earth without being composited. The Peter projection map of the Earth is the accurate representation of the proportions of the continents on Earth. And it completely doesn't match the globes that are in the libraries and science classes all around the world, and the geography classes. Well, the cartography groups of the world have been trying to replace those globes for 66 years. But the governments of the world don't want to shake up everything and replace them. So they've turned down these groups, even though the groups have begged to replace them. Wild, huh? So all the pictures of Earth from space are completely inaccurate because they portray the continents in the proportions that match our globes, and our globes are totally wrong. So it proves that what we've seen is completely wrong. And again, according to Neil deGrasse Tyson, you just want to throw him at me, all the globes should be pear-shaped. I don't know how drastic he wants to claim that those shapes are, but it's interesting. Now, again, I said in my Flat Earth episode that one of the reasons why I believe that there's some explaining to do, as Ricky Ricardo would say, is the expanding Earth theory. It's, for me, damn near conclusive that even if we were on some sort of disk, that this land was all together at one point and somehow it's separated. Because you can close up all the oceans on Earth and all the land masses come together perfectly on all sides into a smaller sphere. Now, what if this is some Truman Show container and that planets are actually much, much larger, and that we're simply a little patch on the top, and our sky has been simulated, so whatever stars that we see are a computer simulation of the stars that are really out there. They do exist, but they're not the ones that we see. Or maybe we're seeing a camera projection from the other side. Sci-fi, right? But if it was a firmament, then what happens to the history of mankind? There's a lot of religions on Earth that believe all kinds of things that are unbelievable, right? Look at the Egyptians. I've said it before. They had the mechanical ability to sculpt a human face so unbelievably symmetrically accurate that computer lasers today, all right, frickin' lasers, would struggle to create the same level of contour in some of the big giant faces that are some of the statues out there. The geometry is identical on both sides. No variation in 3 dimensions. And this is, if you go with Graham Hancock's accurate dating of the system, you're talking about faces that were carved potentially 35,000 BC, not 3,500 BC. So they had the mechanical ability to portray anything in stone that they could conceive, that they could see. But what did they do? They drew a bunch of half animal, half human gods all over the place. Anubis and Ra. Some of them were Isis and Horus, but Horus has a head, it was a hawk head or whatever. And so we're to believe that they had this amazing rendering ability but didn't draw anything remotely human. Just on purpose. It's interesting. Native Americans also have this mixture of animal and man. They have men that transform into animals, animals that transform into men. But this goes on all over the world. And what's interesting is you typically will have some sort of Birdman in every single culture. That's what's also interesting. We have Caucasian men portrayed in stone in South America, or South America, excuse me. I think in South Africa as well. How's that possible? Supposedly we weren't there. We have Mayans creating men inside machines that look as if they fly. They're Mayan people inside the machines. But we also have religions. Religions, I believe that number up to about 23, that have virgin births, that have winter solstice birthdays, that have death and resurrection stories. And it's fascinating. But most of us will say, well, that's just, for weak-minded people to teach allegory to their kids, to make sure that there's sort of a fairy tale story. Sort of like Santa Claus, be good or you don't get presents. This one's a little more intense. This is be good or you'll go to hell. Keeps everybody in check. And of course, law of the jungle starts becoming the reality when you have no moral imperatives in life. But what if it's a firmament? How long would it have been here? How long ago would we have been created? Now, of course, Christians jump on this firmament idea and this flat earth idea, and they completely try to usurp the whole thing. Again, they're myopically saying that, 95% of the world's population that has ever lived and ever will live is not going to heaven because they had no exposure to Christianity whatsoever, or they thought it was ridiculous. Of course, Christians also say that every other religion is ridiculous and theirs is the one. When you look at Egyptology or the gods of Egypt, do you feel like you're connecting with the true gods? Probably not. When you look at Native American gods, do you believe that you are looking at your gods? Probably not. Do you feel silly if I were to say, this is what you should believe because this one's true? Probably. And I think it's odd that anyone can find an imaginary God system that seems right, that seems correct. Walking on water seems completely fine for some people, but Anubis taking your soul over the river Styx is totally crazy, right? The true answer is, without being visited by the creators of the dome, of the firmament, we wouldn't know how long it's been here. We simply wouldn't. The theory of the firmament is that it is built so large that we don't naturally want to go to the edge. It's just we got plenty of land that's unexplored. But as population increases, we start to become aware that we're in the dome. We're aware that we're in a petri dish, and that's when the population needs to be thinned out. Could be when a flood happens. And it's not necessarily the singular God that holds together the universe. Perhaps the curators of the dome itself, some other sub-race that goes up, some race that built this thing. Maybe, again, they look just like us. Maybe it's just like a Truman Show. Who knows? When one tries to escape the dome, what happens? Well, you get into colder and colder water, which is one of the other big reasons that you have to question the globe, is that the North Pole and the South Pole have a major degree difference. The average degree temperature of the North Pole is 4 degrees Fahrenheit. The South Pole, oddly positioned in the exact same relative distance from the sun, is a negative 60 degrees Fahrenheit. That is absolutely, positively, technically impossible if we're on a ball. Because regardless of how the world's tilted, the average exposure of time versus south versus north is exactly the same. Right? There is no up and there is no down to the universe. Therefore, the atmosphere at the top cannot be different than the atmosphere at the bottom. But you remember the ozone layer thing? They said it's strictly an ozone layer problem at the bottom of the earth. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? Apparently, there's a top and a bottom to the universe. Oh, and it just so happens to be where all the first world countries exist. We consider that to be top. Sorry, Australia. You're in the bottom. You're in the pooper. Right? How absurd is that? It's ridiculous. But if we were in a firmament experiment, we were in some sort of dome. And by the way, very interesting thing. Before I move on, because I keep thinking about it, but I forget to say it. If any of you have ever been in science class and split a beam of light into the rainbow format, or if you've ever seen the cover of Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon, you'll see the triangle, a beam of light goes in, and it turns into a spectrum of the rainbow, right? Most of us have held a garden hose out there and seen a rainbow. Most of us have seen a rainbow outside, and there's something very interesting about the shape of a rainbow. It's in the shape of a dome. It's in the shape of firmament. And why is that? Why is it when we stick it through a prism in college, it is exactly the same shape as the light going in? But when we do it in the atmosphere, when the light that is perhaps bouncing off the edge of a round dome comes down onto our spraying water, creating a prism in the water, it's always the same shape. Globally, take any rainbow on planet Earth, and you could zoom it up and overlay it on other rainbows, and proportionally speaking, it is the exact same ratio. From using a garden hose to the double rainbow of some guy on acid on a hillside. It's the same shape. So people, I think, interestingly suggest that that's the light from the sun bouncing off the dome, coming back to us, just like a radar dish, and going through the light and portraying an echo of the shape of the firmament. And wouldn't that be a gorgeous clue to where we are? That a rainbow is proof that we're in a firmament dome. And what happens if we figure this shit out? What happens? Do we get a visit? Well, now, what if, just like I mentioned in Sumerian text, the Sumerians have a reoccurring theme, and this is technically speaking 4500 BC to 5000 BC, but again, if we use the true interpretation of the Egyptian calendar, this might be 40,000 BC. Who knows, right? We're told that there's ice ages. We have no proof that ice ages ever occurred, just so you know. But regardless, doesn't matter how many years back. But the Sumerians constantly said that as their population grew and their leaders became corrupt, a faction came out of the mountains and reset their population and then left back up into the mountains. Now think about it. If one were to travel here in some sort of ship from some Truman door off the side of the firmament, who knows how this thing works? Maybe it's a hard shell, maybe it's a dimensional shell, who knows, right? They would approach over the mountaintops, land, get out, say, you're a naughty person, you're a good person, and they'd reallocate a new leadership because they're trying to nurture the culture in Sumeria, right? These visitations from different cultures that all these other cultures talk about, the Zulu nation, Zulu means people from space. You talk to essentially all of the South American cultures, they talk about visitations from the gods, and they're always white people with these beautiful curled up beards. There's a lot of hieroglyphs in Egypt that signify communication from space. They also have the serpent on their third eye, right here in the front of their head, suggesting the reptilian theory that some communication is portraying, going through their head, and that's royalty, that's the pharaohs. They get blessings and communications from the gods. It could be that the pharaohs were the original folks that were sent down here to colonize. Who knows, right? But I think that would happen. If we were to build one, we would have to send down our culture, and somehow, if we didn't want them to know that we existed, we would have to lead them for a while as if we were one of them. Right? And then somehow exit slowly over time such that it didn't look like we took off in a spaceship. Even though several cultures have recorded such a thing, right? They have even almond-eyed aliens. The aliens portrayed in little sculptures. Maybe it's a stylistic thing. Maybe someone was really bad at sculpting. But in the same era, we have fully accurate, body sculptures of things, right? But some of you might be, new to this whole thing. So I'm just going to go through a couple little things, couple little theories here to answer some questions. A lot of folks say, well, then what is the sun and what is the moon? And the way that it is theorized in the flat earth model is that gravity is nothing more than air pressure. And it's a fairly interesting idea that you have gravity, which is a very weak force when it comes to physics. When we measure it, we can definitely simulate it in a computer. We don't know what makes it happen. But there's some scientists out there that have said that, how do birds fly? If gravity exists, then how could a bird ever escape gravity? You can flap your wings all you want, and you're not going to go anywhere because gravity is always yanking down on you. And if you go with air pressure, for those of you who haven't studied the wing of a plane, it's a game of air pressure. The shape of a wing creates a totally negative pressure on the top of the wing, while all the air pressure underneath is more intense, so it pushes and sucks the plane up. Just like the blades on the helicopter flying over right now. I mean, you got to know, this helicopter flies straight over my house. If it were to come straight down, it would land in this patio. It's unbelievable how it never takes a different path. It's weird. I'm sure it's just coincidence, but goddamn. Anyway, so you're saying, how does the sun and the moon stay up in the sky? I think that the best analogy I can give you is the way that the ocean works. You know that when you're in the ocean, you are naturally buoyant until you take on water and drown, right? But you float. If you keep your mouth closed, if you could just duct tape your mouth, and even if that made you die, which it wouldn't, you could lay on your back in a still lake, you're going to float. And if I take you and push you down, I tape you all up and I push you down into the water, say 10 feet, and I let go, you're going to go back up. Because you're full of air. You're buoyant. You're like the hull of a ship. You displace a chemical compound, which is H2O, and it will just, in a way of trying to replace you, push you up. But if I take you and push you, say, 50 feet down, 75 feet down, something changes. Because the amount of water over you now weighs more than you do, on average, and it will push you down. And regardless if it's 7 miles down or 700 feet down, you are going to hit the bottom. And you'll either be crushed into a pea or crushed into a basketball. So there's natural buoyancy at the top of an ocean surface if you can displace what is up there. But we know that the density of water is more intense at the bottom, slightly, than it is at the top, which is how steel can be crushed, right? All right. And, of course, fish don't die down there because they put the pressure inside themselves, and it keeps it all balanced out, right? It's a phenomenal thing. So now, take the oxygen that's above this disk inside of a firmament, some type of barrier, whether it be an energy barrier, dimensional barrier, structural barrier, who knows, right? The sun and the moon could be at a point up there where they are buoyant. They're just like us on the surface of the ocean. So they could stay up there because it's a big firmament, right? They could stay up there just simply because they're displacing oxygen. A bird can fly because it's just a game of air pressure. And when a bird flaps its wings, it is simply the moving version of a large jet, which is how we got the wing shape to begin with, right? So it is playing the game of air pressure. So when an insect takes off, it's playing the game of air pressure. It is not actually bound by anything atomic mass against atomic mass, right? Exchanging things. Now, I happen to still love the theory of ether that Faraday and Tesla came up with, which is essentially that there's an ethereal wind. As two objects come close together, there's simply a negative space between them. I think that's brilliant. So let's talk about stars for 1 second. We have two rotational apexes in the stars, right? We have the North Pole and the South Pole, and they both rotate. And I think it's Mark Sargent that's come up with an animation where you look at the firmament, if you could pull yourself out from the disk, where perspective would forbid you, if you're in the northern hemisphere, perspective would cut off the southern hemisphere, and the southern, it would cut off the northern hemisphere. And so he's pulled back and created this incredible animation where both sides of the firmament are turning, and they have their own North Pole, South Pole rotation points, and then the whole thing's going in a circle. I think that's how he does it. Now, I'm going to have some fun with this next part, so this isn't terribly serious, but it's interesting. I'm going to put some pictures up here during this particular point. Hopefully I'll put pictures up during a lot of this. So if you're coming through the podcast, you may want to watch the YouTube version. But there are odd shapes, and maybe there's a complete reason for this, explanation for this, but over time we have had these spheres falling from space, and they are landing all over the globe. And I mean in the most remote areas possible. They've had 6 or 7 in one place. So if these were somehow, fuel tanks or environmental tanks related to satellites, the space station, shuttlecraft, aircraft, all this kind of stuff, what doesn't make any sense is that Vietnam, I believe, has had at least a dozen of these things land in a really compact area. I guess, I don't know, if just falling out of a plane, it would be like trying to hit a target with a sniper rifle at anywhere from 30,000 to 60,000 feet, and you're supposed to shoot a bullet through the atmosphere and hit this target, and even remotely hit the same field while you're moving that speed. It doesn't make any sense that these things are landing in a real interesting geocentric area, right? Now, I'm going to show pictures of these things, and they're very different in some cases. One of them looks like almost the way they make fiberglass. But most of them are big, giant, round steel balls with a seam in the center and a rivets at the top. It looks very man-made, actually. And it doesn't look like the rivets were stripped, so it looks like however they were disconnected, it looks like they were unscrewed somehow. But just as a romantic idea, and if you guys know what these things are, please do tell. We actually sat at a smoke lounge for an hour and looked up tons of articles on these things, and no one was claiming to know what these things were. But imagine if these things were merely stars. The light bulbs in the firmament that are stars, somehow attached to giant clock arms up there that rotate. It's a little hard to believe, if not really hard to believe. But then what the hell are these things? It's very interesting. It's a question that should just be answered anyway. But there's a lot of questions about what stars are. It's probably the toughest thing to remotely suggest an answer to. And honestly, you don't have to answer every single thing about everything to know something is different than what you're told, right? But what would the firmament be for? The answer is a sociological experiment. It's really just that simple. It's an experiment where we're put in a petri dish to probably be observed. It is important that we don't know that we're here. Otherwise, we feel like we're being observed and we behave differently. Or, potentially through indoctrination of made-up religions, the experiment is to watch what man behaves like if man believes in Christianity, if man believes in the gods of Egypt, the gods of Native Americans, etc., etc. Perhaps it's to see how, the most evil on planet Earth, through just a decision to pursue leadership, start to run the world. Because the good end up being meek. I don't know. But if we created one of these things, I would imagine it could be a benign observation of the creatures inside the petri dish. It could be that we are almost like a vault of non-GMO seeds. It could be that we are being protected in this firmament from destruction. But I don't know how we can, for those of you who are skeptical about its ability to exist, I'm not sure how we can be skeptical, especially the more sci-fi you are. That we wouldn't do this ourselves. And, quite frankly, maybe everything else is space. Okay? Maybe, again, the world makes a hell of a lot more sense of the sun and the moon on a disk. All the temperature patterns where the equator is, it only makes sense on a disk. Once you take the Earth and tilt it 23.4 degrees and expose it to temperature from the sun, you no longer have a unified equator. You have a sine-cosine equator. And that's not what we see, right? But maybe the stars are something different. Maybe there are a bunch of other domes out there, and we just see a little bit of shininess from them. I seriously doubt it, because they're saying that the sun is really small and floating just a few thousand miles over the surface of the Earth. Right now it's springtime, almost summer. It's almost high noon. It's a little past high noon. And I'm not baking in 100-degree temperatures. And the explanation, I guess, is that somehow the sun being straight overhead, same distance away every single day, 93 million miles away, that due to tilt, due to atmospheric rotation of clouds, that I'm not quite warmed up yet. And that as we're coming around the sun, we're going to get our tilt of the northern hemisphere is going to get a little more drastic, and we'll supposedly be close enough to feel hotter. Now, again, folks, let's do a little bit of math on that. Imagine you're a photographer and you're at the bottom of a skyscraper, World Trade Center. And I say, take a picture of the moon. And you do. Then I say, hey, why don't you get a closer picture of the moon, get in this elevator at the World Trade Center, go up 110 stories, and take a picture on the top. Or the Freedom Tower, or whatever, Empire State Building. And you look up there and you're like, well, dude, I've only gone, 1,100 feet closer to the moon, but it's 236,000 miles away, so it's not going to get any bigger. I barely increased my distance. Okay. So why would anyone suggest that a tilt would change the temperature of any place on Earth? Now, there's a theory that the atmosphere, which is I guess, convex outer shape, concave inner shape, focuses the sun's rays down like a magnifying glass on the equator of Earth. It still would be a sine cosine. It wouldn't be anything like the exact equator patterns that we see on the globes, right? But they're saying that focuses sunlight down into a center spot. And I would say if that remotely happened, we would have the Earth would be set ablaze. Just like a magnifying glass can start a fire. Do you realize you can start a fire with a bottle of water and the sun? Because if you hold the bottom edge of a water bottle and you can get the sun to go through that little segment of water, especially if you empty it all out just so there's a little reservoir in there, you can have a leaf on the ground. And it takes a little while, but it will eventually heat up the leaf and burn the leaf. Imagine that happening with a massive sun 93 million miles away. Now, the same scientists, when you ask them, well, why is it that when we use a sextant and we measure how far up the sun is, it comes out around 3,200 miles? And when we look at the beams coming through the clouds in the forest and measure them back, it's 3,200 miles in the sky. And they say, oh, well, that's because of a phenomenon. When the light rays hit the Earth, they spread out. And that's why you get that effect. There's even a name for it, which I forget. So when they talk about the equator, their science says thermal energy and light energy, turns into a point, as it probably would if it was outside the shape of the atmosphere. Okay? But when they want to explain why the sun looks like it's right on top of the clouds, they say it spreads out. You can't have both theories, people. You got to pick one. And they, it's going to contradict one of the major theories of the universe if that's the case. The truth of the matter is, a ball 93 million miles away from another ball that's emitting light would be equally heated up at every region of its exposed side 24 hours a day. This planet shouldn't have a hot equator and a cold north pole and a south pole. It just shouldn't, because those rays are nearly coming at a perfect straight line. So I have a question for you guys before we wrap this up. Why is it so okay to believe fantasy? Why is it that fantasy is considered a form of entertainment? And it is what we seek. There's a giant group of people that hate George Lucas because he couldn't make Star Wars sequels that appealed to the same quality of fantasy as the first three Star Wars, even though he only directed the first one. There's people who hate on that guy because he can't create the fantasy experience that they want, because they so want and so need fantasy. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? Well, hating on George Lucas is stupid, but loving fantasy and loving story and fiction is just got a blank check, man. But when you believe in Firmament, a scientific concept, not a religious hocus pocus concept, but a scientific concept, or a flat earth disk, which again, the scientific community has done nothing to prove it's a round ball. In fact, their deception, their constant feed of deception about everything scientific, everything NASA does has red flags all over it. And yet people still think we have rovers on Mars because their fragile souls need to believe such a thing, right? Why is it that questioning reality, which really goes from, if you don't think it's true, right, it goes into a fantasy realm. For me, Jesus Christ is fantasy. And I look at it and I say, well, it's a sweet story. It's really trying to make human beings good people. So, I guess if you can believe that. Now, once you take arms against me, I think you need a bullet through your head. If you can't let me believe something different and you're going to get all hostile with me, well, then you're going to get ejected from the dome. You're going to figure out what the afterlife is all about. But most people have respect for other people's beliefs and don't take up arms. But I've actually seen more people laugh off flat Earth, and then when my buddies at the smoke shop start railing off these factoids that they have to explain away, virtually all of them start going, "Oh my God, you're right. That's weird." But they also rattle off a bunch of crap that's not true, which is really funny. I had the distinct privilege of meeting a religious bully the other day, who obviously was very, very worried about his belief system, and as that he turned very belligerent when, I said that I didn't believe in his God, his Jesus Christ God. He literally turned into just a mouth bully, right? It was everything I could do not to mouth bully him back, but he had a bottle of booze with him too, so I thought probably a good idea, just let this guy run his course, right? Now, when my other buddy mentioned flat Earth to him, I never talk about this stuff unless someone is bringing me into the conversation. It's already going, and he said, "Well, I've seen the curvature of the Earth when I fly in a plane." And I said, everybody in the room goes, "No, you haven't. Not even if it's a ball. Have you ever seen the curvature of the Earth from a plane?" Now, there's some people that are pro-flat Earth that say you will see curvature of the Earth if it's a ball, and that's just not true. So I went and did a bunch of math, and I just want to share this with you guys real quick. A lot of you have seen artists render, vanishing horizon lines, right? A lot of longitude or latitude lines they're horizontal in your view rec right in front of you, right? But I also did some math. I looked up how many nautical miles can you see out of the cockpit of a plane on a clear day at 35,000 feet. And it came up to approximately just a little bit shy of 250 miles, what you can see straight out the front of the plane. And so I started doing math on how many pixels in your brain, right, of your retina, moving forward from the dashboard of the plane, even if you were outside on the tip of the plane, scotch taped to the nose cone of a plane, how many feet out in front of you, inches out in front of you, is the first mile, the second mile, the third mile. And it got to a point where the very top, layer of pixels at the top of your brain would be a condensed, I think, nearly 30 miles. So one pixel inside your retinal display of your eyeballs, it represents roughly 30 miles of condensed perspective plane existence, right? And so I also calculated at 35,000 feet, which is roughly 7 miles, right? How many miles of curvature would you see on the left and right side? And I believe it was just shy of 2 miles on both sides. Seems significant, right? But when you have the vanishing point of a sphere, all right, the amount of curvature that you can register is negligible because the last pixel in your eyeballs, which is the edge of the Earth, is more than, let's just say at least, is more than 10 miles of condensed distance. And so when you take 1.7 off the edge, you're not going to see it. You could take 5. You could take 10 miles of curvature on left and right, and you're not going to see it because it's all 1 pixel. So you're never going to see curvature of Earth from a flight in a normal commercial airline. You just won't. Now, there is a great footnote to that, which is that if you did rise up in the sky, as you gain altitude on a sphere, the horizon line should dip just a little bit, and it never does. It always stays right in front of you. So again, if you could stay on a plane and somehow survive the atmospheric change and not get crushed by some vehicle going straight up, and you hold your finger out, and we built a cast around your whole body, and your finger's right at the tip of the line of horizon, and we rise you up 40,000 feet. As far as we can tell, even at 73 miles up, which is way higher than any plane goes, that that horizon line never dips. It never goes down. Now, the Earth is approximately 7,900 miles thick. That's the full diameter of the Earth. So when you take 73 miles and divide it by 7,900 miles, you are only a tiny fraction over the surface of the Earth. But this would still occur at that tiny level of altitude change relative to the entire size of the Earth. So it's very interesting. Supposedly, just to throw a few more out there that are really interesting, supposedly there's a lake in Russia that is over 400 miles long. It freezes every single year, and when survey teams go out and put their survey equipment on it, they can see each other on a clear day. Wow, right? If that's true. Again, these claims come in, what are we going to do in America? You have to be Richard Branson and go out and, fly out and confirm it. Google Earth. Very interesting thing. A friend of mine tried to flippantly prove that the world is round by going to Google Earth and taking a picture of the Antarctica, which is portrayed as an island. And he emails it to me and he says, there it is, right there. You're wrong. Obviously, not putting any thought into this whole thing, not doing any research whatsoever. And I said, well, it's funny you would send me a picture from Google Earth of Antarctica, because if you zoom into this, and I downloaded Google Earth real quick and zoomed into it, and it's all a stitching process. It's a fake continent that's been done with a filter. And if you zoom in straight to the bottom, you have to download Google Earth on your computer. But if you look at the bottom, you see this star stitching of what appears to be some type of non-round thing being squeezed into a round thing. And oddly enough, you might say, well, there's less satellites down there. I'm going to call bullshit on that in a massive way, because even in the late 80s, we were all concerned about the DuPont bullshit about Freon killing the ozone layer, because they wanted to demonize their own product, which had gone into the public domain because they had the only legal replacement after they paid off all the congressmen and senators to make their replacement for Freon free. So this whole ozone layer thing was a big scam, right? But we had amazing shots of the South Pole. Not photographs, but there's plenty of satellites down there supposedly looking at the ozone layer. But now if you take Google Earth and you spin it to the North Pole, where we do not have bases like we do in the South Pole, supposedly. There's no treaty protecting the North Pole. That's another really interesting thing. You don't get killed if you go to the North Pole and film something. But they will shoot you out of the water, shoot you out of the sky if you so much as try to approach the South Pole. Perfect picture of the North Pole. No weird squeezy algorithms up there. No problem at all. Isn't that interesting? Now, there's an angle about the firmament, which is that if they can prove to you that we live in a disk inside a firmament, that somehow you become more special than if you live on a ball floating in space. Because the theory goes is that if we live in a firmament, in a dome, right, on a disk, that God is somehow physically closer to us, and therefore we are more significant. And it promotes a belief in a higher being, because we would see the fingerprints of God within the construction of the dome itself, even though it might be an alien race or us in a more advanced form, right? It is not a mystery that science with a capital S, especially the pop czar science like Neil deGrasse Tyson's diarrhea of the soul, that it is the counterintuitive belief system to any sort of religious belief in a creator for some people. For me, science has always just, revealed the fingerprints of God or gods, So there's a movement online that says essentially, oh, look, we live on a flat earth and therefore God is all, Jesus Christ is real, right? Oh, everyone else is not right. The 22 religions before Christ are just put there to deceive us, right? Oddly enough, I'm going to share this last thing, and it's just a fun piece of research to get into. You're going to roll your eyes if you haven't already. But if you made it to the end of this episode, you got an open mind. There was an interesting reveal, and I don't I haven't done my own, like it's hard to talk to paleontologists, but this is really sort of funny. And a friend of mine, Kyle, the co-host, is actually very interested in the other show, is always been a big dinosaur freak. And there's not enough information to do a whole episode on it. But I think it was Eric Dubé came up with a interesting video suggesting that dinosaurs may be a complete construction of scientists who theorized they existed and then found them. And this is just, I'm just going to throw this at you to go research because it's kind of cool. It's not quite as cool as Stonehenge building being completely reconstructed from scratch in 1954 in a completely different location, having finished up a bunch of blueprints that were never found anywhere else in the world. It was reconstructed in 1901 and 1914 at a different location, but they just reconstructed it all where it is today, and it wasn't built where you see it today, and it wasn't as together as you see it today. So when you see documentaries about that particular part of the earth being the location of its creation, it's all bullshit, right? But, okay, so they lied to you about that. So the idea is that dinosaurs weren't found until they were theorized on paper in the mid-1800s. And that might sound like, well, of course. A lot of things aren't found until we talk about them. What's interesting is that the Egyptians move soil. The Chinese move soil. The South American people move soil. The Arabs move soil. Building gigantic things and quarrying out stone. At no point in the history of man prior to the 1850s had anyone stumbled into a skeleton remains of a dinosaur. But now, you can find them all over the place, right? However, the claim is that no citizen on Earth has ever stumbled into a dinosaur bone without having a paleontologist say, hey, you know what? We did some math on your farmland, and right over there by that red post, we think there might be a dinosaur in that area. And then the person goes and digs, finds the bones. They very quickly claim that the person who found it on their land will donate it to a museum. And then when they're later interviewed, they say that they were basically forced to say that they were going to donate it. The other one is that no dinosaur bones are actually on display anywhere in the world. Everything that you see is a duplicate of a master copy, and all the master copies are behind vault doors. Very interesting, right? The other one is that you can, I didn't know this, but it makes complete sense. They said you can heat up bones from any animal. Just heat them up like a broth, and they'll actually turn into a sludge. And then you could injection mold them into any shape you like, and they'll dry and become that bone shape. And then you can do whatever you want, cast from there and say that it's real, right? Now, bones from dinosaurs are supposedly fossilized. They don't have any biological matter in them, so you shouldn't be able to find a biological bone. Now, oddly enough, there was a dinosaur bone retrieved, I think somewhere in Montana or something, and it had bone marrow inside the bone. And this religious group came out and said, we will pay to have that carbon dated, to have it examined. And the group that found it, the paleontologists that found this, refused to do the most logical thing possible, which is to analyze the biological material inside this bone. And now the theory is that it's because it's a real bone off some animal from our time frame. But there's a company in China, there's a company all over the world that build these dinosaur skeletons from scratch so that museums have something to show to kids. So it's just a very fascinating thing that perhaps something like a dinosaur was a romantic engineering of something. There's a lot of paleontologists that have defected out of the profession because they said this stuff is completely fake. The amount of stuff that we synthesize is fake. He says once you start putting, some of these guys said that once you start putting flesh and bone and muscle on these things that they topple over, they couldn't possibly exist, right? Which again was where Flat Earth talks about the Earth being 1/4 the size when they existed here, thicker atmosphere, less gravity, due to the displacement of ether being less, and therefore they could exist. So that makes sense to me as well. But of course, when you hear someone tell you the dinosaurs didn't exist, what happens? An irrational lack of research rejects the theory. I just want to give you that example because that sort of dovetails with anyone saying the Earth is anything different than a round sphere as portrayed by NASA, which again Neil deGrasse Tyson just argued with. I think you feel me. If you haven't already, go to mkultraradio.com. From there, you get all the links to Facebook pages for both our normal show, MK Ultra Radio, which is MKU Facebook, or this one, which is DT Facebook at the top. Coming through video, there's an audio, there's a video. All the links are in there. Plus, those of you who want to go back, 100 episodes, it's all on there. So get in there and enjoy yourself. Our traffic is doing really, really well. In 3 weeks, we nearly doubled the previous 2 years of viewership just using this show as an anchor, which is super cool. So please get onto the Facebook page too and give me suggestions, because if we want to do another 100, I am bone dry, people. The world's going to have some meteorites fall out of the sky or some UFOs land before I'm going to have anything just knee-jerky. I probably got at least 3 episodes in the queue right now. One's a special report. This is a redo of one I've already done. I think it came out a hell of a lot better. So again, if you made it this far, thanks for listening. As always, I will see you in the next Deep Thoughts after you take care of yourself and someone else. Over now.